Something seriously wrong just happened at the emergency room today. I was waiting in the emergency room to take my daughter to see the doctor for a really bad scrape on her knee. My wife insisted, don't sue me. A hospital in question usually has a very busy ER, a serious lack of doctors to address the volume of patients, and this day was no different. When I walked in, I was struck by how generally tense it all was. Everyone seemed stressed. A lot of murmuring of frustration about the long wait, and about 10 people had surgical masks on. And it's flu season after all. I found a secluded corner where I could spend time with my daughter. There wasn't much seating room, but I was comfortable enough sitting on the floor. After about a full hour of waiting and colouring with crayons with my daughter in a princess colouring book we'd brought along, I jumped at the sound of a loud cough. The sound was from the other side of the room, and I figured the person's chair must have scooted at the time of their cough, because I heard a high-pitched metallic squeak at the same time they coughed. A few minutes later, the same person coughed again, and it had that same chair scooting across the floor sound. This time was a bit louder though. I stood up to stretch and noticed that the person who coughed was not in a chair. They were on a bench, bolted to the floor. The thought of this didn't strike me as too weird at the time, but I did notice it. My daughter fell asleep in my lap over the next hour. I got on my phone and put on my headphones, keeping an eye out for the nurse who was occasionally calling names. I even started to doze a little myself, but suddenly I heard a long screech, like a huge metal table being dragged across a tile floor. I looked up to see the person from before, a 20-something woman with blonde hair, bending over, her mouth as wide as anything. As the sound subsided, it turned into a fading scream. The room went silent, and everyone stared at this woman, this girl. She clutched her throat in pain, and tears were streaming down her face. My daughter awoke to the sound of yet another scream. The woman bent over again, her face contorted as she wailed a screeching metal shriek again. My daughter immediately started screaming too, a totally normal scream for a 4-year-old who's just awakened from a nap. But people around the room looked at each other nervously while I tried to hold my daughter and keep her calm. The hospital staff came to the woman, trying to talk to her to find out if she was okay, and to try and get her in to see the doctor, but she pushed them away and just kept screaming over and over, each time sounding exactly more like metal on metal. It sounded almost like something was grinding. My thoughts tripped over the word, and suddenly I was fully awake. I grabbed my daughter and stood up. I backed away towards the door, but still watched. Now everyone in the room, except the nurses and orderlies, were backing away too. I watched as the woman retched once, twice, and then a third time. Blood fell from her mouth, and another horrible grinding noise came from it. She looked like she was trying to talk, and looked panicked as hell, but she just kept retching. And then I noticed that the blood contained glinting bits of metal. She collapsed into the pool of blood, her mouth hanging open. She looked like she was unconscious, but she was still breathing fast and shallow breaths. I saw that her mouth was filled with large chunks of shiny metal. A few people screamed. Most of them were silent, looking in horror. The nurses got the woman onto a stretcher and wheeled her away. One grabbed a mop and another a bucket, and they started to clear away the blood, looking shaken and confused as they did so. Another woman walked up and asked what happened. Others followed, creating a cacophony of angry, confused interrogators. The nurses seemed just as confused and scared as everyone else. I stayed to wait and find out what was going on, despite being scared to death myself. Some people left, horribly shaken by these happenings. I couldn't figure out what could possibly have been wrong with this woman, but I wanted to stick around to see if I could glean anything. I saw what looked like a hospital official wearing a suit and tie pull some of the nursing staff aside to a small room. My daughter had finally calmed down and fallen asleep in my arms. I carried her and walked to the door of this small room and heard the nurses all asking what was going on. I gathered that she had come in complaining about a sore throat. She had already passed in the other room. They found pieces of metal in her mouth. Large ones. They also gave her an X-ray and found that this metal was perforating her lungs, stomach, and heart. That's all they knew, and they said they'd be updating the nurses with more information later. I left. I couldn't bear to hear anything else. I went home and put my daughter to bed. I lied to my wife and said that the doctor just said to put ice on the scrape. The reason I'm writing this down now is because I was awoken from my sleep by the sound of my daughter coughing. It sounded like metal scraping metal.